Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody back to another podcast. So this podcast, I'm going to carry on with what we've been doing, which is essentially looking at strategies for dealing with chaos, crisis, and the unforeseen. I hope the last couple of podcasts have been useful, and that all of you who've been listening have been trying this out. I always view life as a bit of a sort of an experiment. We try some things, we decide to create a bit of a hypothesis, we try stuff out, we test it, and then we decide ultimately based on the results whether it's useful or not, whether it's worked or not. Now, unfortunately, some of us end up in the position where we do the experiment, but we keep repeating the same mistakes, which is not essentially a very good way to live. Okay, let me also extend a warm welcome to all of those of you who are joining us for the first time. So let me just quickly explain. I do a weekly podcast which is about 20 minutes long, usually focuses on a topic. I try to link them, and in this case dealing with chaos, crisis, and the unforeseen. It's going to be a little bit of a series on that theme, basically. So I'm sure most of us at this point in time, given the pandemic, geopolitical issues and so on, have had an interesting time of it. Some people refer to this period as the annus horribilis. Others have experienced some unforeseen benefits in this particular experience. So the point is that nothing is either just good or bad. And that leads me into fundamentally today's topic, and it sits under the big heading of inspirational masculinity. I think that as men, we have certain tasks to get under our belt in order to be able to be the man that we want to be. Okay, so it's about being and then doing. And I've talked about this before in podcasts. Now, all you guys are going to be really pleased to know that this particular episode is about feelings. I know some of you guys may, in fact, now be rolling your eyes and going, oh, here we go. He wants me to cry, or, I'm supposed to be like a girl, or, overly emotional. Let me put your hearts at ease. None of that actually is true. What is true is that the way that we're brought up in the patriarchal model, the sort of traditional masculine stereotype, is that we grow up to sort of have a binary approach to emotions. Right? I do a lot of work with teenagers. Most of them, if you ask them, how are you? They'll go, yeah, okay, not okay. You'll get some sort of very dilute, superficial response. That also applies to when I ask them how they are feeling, And it's not just teenagers. This is right across the board with a lot of men. If you catch them off guard and you go, how are you? They'll go either good, and if they're, particularly not having a good time, and they know you quite well, they'll go, not so good, or bad. But that's a very narrow emotional vocabulary, and it often frustrates women no end because it doesn't really give us a sort of nuanced expression of our experience. So one of the aspects in this is it's not just about getting us as men to be more articulate emotionally, right? It's about actually being in touch with what it is that we're feeling. And so part of this is experiencing what's going on for us, in terms of our body and in terms of our mind, and being able to label our emotions appropriately. Now, let me put a disclaimer into this right here and now. And this goes with one of the topics I've spoken earlier on, which is that, we need to differentiate very clearly between mental health and psychological distress and disorders. So on that note, let me reinforce that anxiety and depression are not feelings. They are a set of symptoms. Now, I could be feeling anxious, but I could have also a whole host of symptoms running along and a whole host of emotions going through me. Things like apprehension, fear, sadness, guilt. Guilt's an interesting one because it is, in fact, a combination of feelings. Shame as well. So we need to get a bit more practiced with how do we label our experience. So once we get through this whole binary approach to our emotional state, what then? Well, in order to maintain this, one of the things that we need to really, really work on, and we come back to a very favourite topic of mine, is our self-awareness. So you need to ask yourself the question, how do I feel? What do I feel? And how do I know what I'm feeling? Now, there's a little bit of physiology in that, i.e., for example, if I get scared, my heart rate increases, okay, or I might clench my jaw, or my breathing gets shallow. So there's an immediate interrelationship between my body and what I'm feeling, okay. Now, sometimes we could argue that emotions, feelings, are sensations that we label. I'll stick a label on it. Classic one is, the difference between fear and excitement. If I paddle out in 8-foot surf, and I haven't done that in years, the chances are that I'm not going to be feeling excited. In fact, what I'm going to be feeling is anxious, which means that I'm going to be scared. The anxiety comes from me projecting into the future, going, I'm going to get killed here, which may in fact not be true. It might just mean that I need to, grab my self-confidence by the shoelaces and go, you know what you're doing, you've done this before. Yes, there's been a long time between drinks, but let's just do it. Okay, so that whole process of self-awareness to help expand our emotional vocabulary is really, really important. Well, I'm not suggesting necessarily you do that, but you could play around with it. If you go to the internet, I'm sure if you type in emotions emojis, you're going to get one of those cute little sheets that I very often use with very young adolescents about, point to the emoji that describes how you're feeling. And it's in some respects, this is not an amusing exercise or just an amusing exercise. It's actually really, really helpful. One of the secondary sort of aspects to this is that once we learn to understand our own feelings, our own emotional responses, it's really, really useful to begin to understand how other people feel too. Now, that bit is where we talk about empathy. Okay, so we're going to, understanding myself, understanding other people, it means that I'm going to be able to put myself into their shoes and create a significantly higher level of intimacy. Okay, and when I use that word intimacy, I'm not talking about sex, okay? I'm talking about emotional, intellectual, social intimacy, okay? Now, one of the challenges for a lot of us is that we feel like our emotions can go out of control, right? Now, let me explain that a little bit. Our emotions essentially emerge from a part of the brain that's not in our direct conscious influence. Okay, that doesn't mean to say you get out a jail card with, especially your negative emotions. I mean, a lot of people will say, I just couldn't help myself, especially when it comes to anger and aggression, the negative emotions, it just came out. And there is some truth in that, but not entirely. Because ultimately, as an adult, hopefully have gotten more mature and therefore be able to, one, recognise my feelings, understand them, and regulate them. So, in a lot of my work, especially in the early days, working with men who were violent in relationships, the excuse "she made me do it" just doesn't wash. If you were maybe 2, I could understand a temper tantrum, but not at 20 or 25 or 30. Even under provocation, we have the capacity to step away. This part of the brain, the limbic system, is really geared towards our survivability. Okay? And so part of that process about emotions, about feelings that's involved in them coming out has to do with memory and experience. Okay, so I'll give you an excellent example of that, where if you got locked into a cupboard as a kid with no lights and no way of getting out of it as a form of punishment, then your immediate reaction, even as an adult, unless you've learned how to manage that, work through that experience, is going to be that you're going to feel fearful, either in the dark or in closed spaces or both. So, the question often is about, I don't understand why I'm claustrophobic. Now, sometimes it's not that clearly defined. At other times, it may be. It's interesting that arachnophobia, i.e. fear of spiders, is actually very, very highly represented amongst populations where there is not a lot of spiders. Yeah, the UK, for example. So there is an element of learning to live with beasties like spiders, snakes, including sharks. I always find it really, really interesting that the Americans have this attitude that, Australia has the most sort of shark-infested waters. But having been to California, I can tell you that, great whites are quite abundant along the California coast, possibly more so than what we've got here in Australia. They've also got land predators that we don't. One of our fiercest creatures possibly might be the Tasmanian devil, and it's the size essentially of a cat, a pretty fierce cat, but a cat nonetheless. So the other important aspect to recognise is that emotions are closely linked to values, and this is one of the reasons why I spend quite a bit of time with anyone that I work with, and also myself, about understanding what my values are and what emotions are linked to my values. Okay, and I think, these days in the world, some of that might be really, really useful to do to start off in schools with, because we're seeming to have generated people who are absolutely devoid of appropriate values. So the next bit that I want to talk about, and I'm going to finish with this bit for today and pick up with a couple of other things in the next podcast and then on to the next topic, is the idea of managing emotions. Okay, so remember, no get out of jail card simply because your emotions come from your limbic system. That's just an immature excuse. So, how do I actually manage my feelings? Well, there's some, physical things that we can do when we get over the top with our emotions, whether that be sadness, grief, and essentially sadness and grief, I think, do need to be expressed, especially in the early parts of it. But for some people, they don't seem to necessarily subside often, and it causes them a great deal of pain. So they get what I call symptom anxiety. They worry about feeling sad. They're worried about grieving. Okay, so the physical stuff. So things like abdominal breathing to slow your heart rate down and to bring your breath back into the body so that you feel more grounded are going to be important aspects in how you deal and manage your emotions. Okay, so let me refer back to our friend William Shakespeare, very insightful man, and who wrote really insightful things about the human condition. And in Hamlet says in one of the soliloquies, things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And so that's a really, really important aspect. So one of the important parts in dealing with how I feel is to use reason. Right? I'll often talk about, be rational, be logical, be objective. That's how you get, in essence, a handle on especially strong emotions, okay? I can be angry, but I don't want to be aggressive, okay? And there's a distinct difference. At this point, I'm actually thinking about doing a bit of a podcast about that in of itself. So how do we do that? Well, let's start with a couple of simple questions. So the first one, how do I feel about the situation I'm in? What do I think I should do about it? What effect would that have for me and for other people? Remember, we want to be empathic. It's not just about me. If it's all about me, that's called narcissism. Now, there's lots of different types of narcissism. I'm not going to cover that at the moment. But it is about my relationship with others as well. The next question is, does it actually fit with my values? Okay, so let me give you a personal example. I'm a very strong proponent of non-violence, ahimsa. Now, I can get pretty angry, and at times I've had a short fuse. I've learned and I've matured beyond that, I hope, although I'll bet I could still get triggered about certain things. Won't get into that right now, but it's there. Hitting someone is not part of my non-violent values. Right? I don't hit anybody or anything. If I'm hit, I may try to defend myself, but that's about it. But I would not actually be the aggressor. So if it doesn't fit my values, what else could I do that might be a better fit? Okay, so that's a very clear next step. And here's again, we're coming back to the relational thing, the intimacy in my world that I want to maintain. I need to ask myself, is there anyone else that I could ask about this and who might help or support me or challenge me? Because remember, sometimes we actually need to be given a reality check in regard to our feelings and how we think about what's going on for us in a particular situation. So in conclusion, let me just summarize this a little bit. So the first thing is expand your emotional vocabulary. It's not just good or bad, okay? The second bit is we need to understand where our reactions are coming from in our situation, right? So, I discovered going into an MRI machine that I can get claustrophobic. Never experienced it anywhere else, but in that particular circumstance, I did. At this point, I've tried to figure out why. Still haven't really come up with a reasonable, rational, logical sounding answer to that little problem. The second or third bit really is managing emotions. So And that is where reason comes into it. Okay, so you need to exercise some good, logical, rational, and objective thinking. And on that note, I hope this was helpful. Please reflect on this. I get too many people who make some very confusing assumptions and statements about emotions and what emotions are. And, you know, the one thing that I really love hearing is that I always follow my feelings. That is not necessarily the best way to go. Just a heads up on that. It can work at times, but not always. So on that note, loved having your company. Let's get together again in a week. Until then, signing off, and focus on inspiring change in yourself and others.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at noirtainment, noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.